Hello, everyone, and welcome to our daily devotional for Friday, the 19th. Our daily devotional today is going to be a little bit different. It may not be so much of a devotional as much as it is kind of a, I don't know, public service announcement or something like that. It's going to be, we're looking at, there's three, I guess you could say three main vaccines right now for COVID. One of them, the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine, has been getting some attention, especially from the Catholic Church. And there are some who are saying that it's morally wrong to receive the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so I wanted to take a look at this in case anyone encounters this problem, or there's a lot of misinformation also out there about this. And kind of wanted to talk a little bit about this and just kind of consider how a Christian should or how a Christian can view this. The title of the article was published back on March 2nd. Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine morally wrong? Wrong? Question mark. Catholic bishops caution just that. The Archdiocese urged to use Moderna's or Pfizer's vaccines instead. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is urging people to seek alternatives to coronavirus vaccines produced by Janssen, a company of Johnson & Johnson, arguing that the product raises additional moral concerns through its connection to aborted fetal cells. Now, get out of here, fly. Some of the misinformation that's going around is that the vaccine actually contains aborted babies, and that's part of the problem also, is that it is some of this misinformation that's going around. In a press release Tuesday, Bishop Kevin C. Rhodes said that people should instead take Pfizer's or Moderna vaccines if possible. If one can choose among equally safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines, the vaccine with the least connection to aborted-derived cell lines should be chosen. Therefore, if one has the ability to choose a vaccine, Pfizer or Moderna's vaccines should be chosen over Johnson & Johnson's. They released a statement saying that, this is the Archdiocese of New Orleans, the latest vaccine from Johnson & Johnson is morally compromised. The USCCB previously said Catholics could receive Moderna's or Pfizer's vaccines, noting that use of the products was very remote from the initial evil of the abortion. The debate, go away, fly. The debate centers around the cell line HEK293, which was cloned from a fetus aborted in the early 1970s. The cell line itself is not composed of original fetal tissue, and neither Moderna's, Pfizer's, nor Johnson & Johnson's vaccines contain fetal tissue. The Food and Drug Administration issued an emergency use authorization for Johnson & Johnson's vaccine on Saturday. While the bishops have said the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are preferable to Johnson & Johnson's, they've also urged people to find alternatives, if possible, to those as well. Conference also specified that the use of the cell line in development and production meant that AstraZeneca's vaccine, like Johnson & Johnson's, raised more moral concerns than the other two. Johnson & Johnson defended its research. There is no fetal tissue in our COVID-19 vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine is an inactivated, non-infective adenovirus vector similar to a cold virus, which codes for the coronavirus spike S protein. We are able to manufacture hundreds of millions of doses using our engineered cell line system that enables the rapid production of new viral vaccines to combat many of the most dangerous infectious diseases. The Archdiocese emphasized the role of a medical provider's and an individual's conscience. We maintain that the decision to receive the COVID-19 vaccine remains one of individual conscience in consultations with one's healthcare provider. We also maintain that in no way does the Church's position diminish the wrongdoing of those who decided to use cell lines from abortions to make vaccines. In doing so, we advise that if the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine is available, Catholics should choose to receive either of those vaccines rather than to receive the new Johnson & Johnson because of its extensive use of abortion-derived cell lines. So, and that's the article. And like I said, there's been misinformation about, well, the Johnson & Johnson, or in some cases, the claim is that all of the vaccines contain aborted babies' cells. That's not the case. And it's ultimately what, there was an aborted baby back in the 70s And some of the cell lines are what are used in terms of cloning those cell lines in certain protein parts of the genetic code are used to then recreate certain elements so that it can be more effective in a person's body. It's a cell line. It's not. They're not cloning aborted babies. They're not cloning. It's not. It's in essence they're taking a DNA pattern. They're taking a blueprint, and then they're just copying that blueprint for adaptation in a person's body. And I can understand why it would make some people uncomfortable, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of our pharmaceuticals, a lot of our modern vaccines have been derived from these types of cell lines and cloned from different cell lines that have happened like this. The fact, to me, that the biggest difference here is that if it were utilizing an aborted baby, actual cells from an aborted baby, I would probably have a problem with that. For conscience sake, yes, I would have a problem with that. It would be as if I were profiting from an actual aborted baby and those cells are going into my vaccine. That would be a problem. But the fact that this was from 50 years ago and they're simply duplicating a cell line from it, to me, that has no bearing whatsoever on abortion or anything else. And there's a couple different elements to this. Obviously, and I agree with the statement about, where did they say this? The Archdiocese emphasized the role of a medical provider in an individual's conscience. And I think that certainly remains true for religious individuals, and for those of us who are Christians, certainly the role of the conscience, I think, is the key element here. But in terms of scripture, in terms of right or wrong, is it wrong to get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? No, I don't believe that it is. I don't believe it's wrong to get any of the vaccines. You know, like I said, if it contained actual aborted children, that would be different. But in terms of what they're using, to me, it's not an issue. However, when it comes to Christians, and depending on how far you want to go with any connection whatsoever to abortion, no matter how tenuous that connection may be, certainly, obviously, there's acknowledgement of conscience in that. That's not to say, though, that Moderna and Pfizer's, they also utilize certain cell lines, and that's one of the things that this that they bring out in this, is that the conference specified that the use of the cell line in development and production meant that AstraZeneca's vaccine, like Johnson & Johnson's, raised more moral concerns than the other two, which is not to say that that Moderna and Pfizer don't have any connections whatsoever. They just used a lesser portion of the cell line. So they're all based on certain things. And when you start to look at it, and this is getting maybe into a little of a complicated concept, but as unfortunate as it is and as sad as it is, a lot of our medical research, a lot of our medical knowledge, modern medical medicine, has its basis in inhumane practices. I mean, going back all the way to, in some cases, back to the Middle Ages. Some of the research that was done on human beings, some of the research done on the Jews during the Holocaust. I mean, there's all kinds of connections that when you look at where a certain branch of understanding regarding the human body or genetics or whatever, where it started, sometimes there are connections to inhumane practices. Does that make the inhumane practice right? No, it doesn't. Even if it saves lives, no, it still doesn't make the inhumane practice or sinful practice, as the cases sometimes were, correct. However, does that mean that knowledge shouldn't be utilized? that's one of those ever evolving, ever constant debates, is just because some of the knowledge that was gained was through inhumane or wrong, morally wrong practices, does that mean now that we have that knowledge we shouldn't use it? And to me, from looking at it objectively, I think, listen, what that person did or what those people did was wrong. Okay, the abortion in the 1970s that is based on this whole cell line, that was wrong. But does that mean we can't utilize information from it? Does that mean that that information shouldn't be used to help save lives? It doesn't make the abortion right, but at the same time, knowledge is knowledge. And so I think we have to be very careful if we are making a statement that, like the Catholic Church, and I don't mean to be beating up on the Catholic Church. I don't know why this week it just seemed like there was a bunch of news going around for that. But I believe it's wrong especially for a church organization as this is, to make the statement or to tell people that you shouldn't use this vaccine because of this reason, when there's a lot of other medical information, other medical procedures that have evolved and come about because of other inhumane practices. If you're going to say, well, anything connected to abortion is wrong and is kind of a poisoned fruit, then you have to be fair and balanced on that, and say, well, that means all of it, anything having anything to do with any inhumane practice or morally wrong or sinful knowledge should also be rejected. And you'd be surprised how many common procedures and surgeries sometimes have links to inhumane or morally wrong procedures in the past. And it may be way in the past, hundreds of years. But what difference does it make? Whether it's 100 years or 50 years in the case of this 1970s abortion. In the end, I think it should be up to each individual to make that decision. Like I said, I don't believe this is that complicated of a problem. But if we do find ourselves having a problem with this, then we have to ask ourselves, well, how far am I willing to go on that? Because there's a lot of our medical science, a lot of medical technology, pharmaceuticals, and so forth, like I said, that are derived from other inhumane practices. Am I going to draw a line and say, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with any of it for conscience sake? And again, if that's the case, fine. As long as we're consistent. That's the word I was looking for, consistent in that application. But it made me think about Romans 14, and I'm not going to go into the whole context or whatnot. The eating of meats, and Paul establishes early on here in chapter 14 that the meats are clean. Okay, you can eat the meat, you cannot eat the meat. That doesn't matter. But what Paul emphasizes here in verse 3, let not him who eats despise him who does not eat. Let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Which is to say, in the end, the meats are clean. So Jews, you can't judge the Gentiles and say they're doing something wrong because they're eating the meat. Gentiles, you can't judge and say that the Jews are wrong because they're not eating the meat. He's talking to Christians, obviously, but we're talking culturally, because the meats are clean. And even though it offends your conscience to eat the meat, that doesn't mean you can condemn your brother for eating the meat. Now, having said that, what does Paul conclude? Paul concludes, listen, he's ultimately speaking to the Gentile brethren. Listen, you know that this is going to cause if you know this is going to cause a problem for your brother, just don't eat the meat. Okay? Yes, you have that right, and this kind of goes back to our lesson on Sunday. Yes, you have the right to eat the meat, but don't eat the meat if it's going to cause your brother to stumble, especially in front of them. In the privacy of your own home, your brother doesn't know what you're having for dinner. That might be different. But notice how Paul concludes. He says, do you have faith? And in this case, it's conviction regarding whether you're eating the meat or not eating the meat. Have it to yourself before God. Happy is he who does not condemn himself in what he approves, which is to say, causing your brother to stumble. He says in verse 23, "But he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because he does not eat from faith." And that's that conviction, that persuasion that the meats are clean. No, I say that's not exactly right. That he's not eating with full conviction of conscience that the meats are clean. Knowledge is one thing. Paul has already established the meats are clean. Okay, so don't judge each other in whether you eat or don't eat. But in terms of conscience, when you've lived under a certain paradigm, a certain set of rules, under this case, in this case, the Jews under the old law, you viewed certain meats as being unclean. That's the way it was. And so, verse 23, that's not going to it's not going to go away overnight. Sometimes knowledge can retrain the conscience very quickly. But in other cases, the conscience can lag behind knowledge. And that's what Paul's addressing in verse 23. "He who doubts is condemned if he eats, because he does not eat from faith," that full conviction of conscience. Whatever is not from faith is sin. Not that it's sinful to eat the meat, but for that brother whose conscience is not yet fully accepting or understanding or caught up to the knowledge or to knowing that the meats are clean, he feels as if he's defiled himself. And for that purpose, that causing that brother to stumble in that way is sin. And this is similar to what we looked at in 1 Corinthians on Sunday. And so I say that to say that whatever is not from faith or not from conviction is sin. And so I think it's important that if there are brethren out there or individuals that we meet that have an issue with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we can explain it, and maybe we feel this way ourselves, and that's fine. Like I said, I don't believe that there's anything morally wrong or scripturally wrong with any of the vaccines. Again, if it had aborted baby cells in it, that might be different. But, well, I say it might be. It would be for me. But it doesn't. And for that matter, it's single lines of code that are duplicated from this pattern of this aborted baby in the 70s. So again, to me, it's a matter, it is a matter of conscience. I don't believe it should be as big a deal as what has kind of been revolving around it, and certainly should not be subjected to misinformation about it containing aborted babies, because it doesn't. That's not how that works. That would be not only unethical, but it would be unlawful as well. That you're not allowed to do that. So it's I think we just need to be very careful, first of all, to make sure that when we hear stuff like this, that we actually check it out. Misinformation, whether it's on Facebook or other places, it's rampant for all kinds of things. But something like this, check it out, make sure, find out what's true, what's not. If you hear somebody repeating it, you might let them know, hey, that's not really true. Maybe you can give them some details. But in the end, if a person has a problem with it, they have a problem with it. Okay, and that's fine. They have the right to request a different type of vaccine. They may not be able to get it as quickly or whatnot, maybe as another one where they have a stockpile maybe of the Johnson & Johnson. But I think this is the type of thing that, like I said, it's not exactly a devotional, but I think it is important to cover, to look at this in case some of our brethren are out there thinking about this, hearing these rumors or whatnot, or refusing to get a vaccine, maybe because they've heard that it contains aborted cells or something like that, and aborted baby cells. And so I figured I'd talk about it a little bit. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to let me know. I know this is one of those kind of, it's a little bit complicated in terms of the science behind it and so forth. But I'd be happy to talk with anybody who has any more questions about it. Anyway, so that's the daily devotional today. Keep in mind, our next daily devotional will be Monday at 6:30, Lord willing. And I hope to see you all then. Y'all have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.